Soviet soldiers seemed to suffer from survivor guilt without knowing it. When they thought of all their comrades who had died, it felt slightly bewildering to be one of those alive at the end. They had hugged each other like brothers in relieved congratulation, but many could not sleep well for weeks after the guns had fallen silent. The unaccustomed quietness unnerved them. They also needed to digest what had happened during all those moments when they had not dared to think too much. There was no doubt that what they had been through was the most important period, not just of their own lives, but also of world history. They thought of their homes and girlfriends and wives and how they would be respected members of the community. For women, soldiers, however, the prospects were far less promising. There were fewer men to go around. Those who were pregnant knew that they would have to put a brave face on it. So Ninka, a young woman soldier, wrote to her friend, "You have got a daughter, and I will have a baby. And let's not be sad about not having husbands." Most of them had their child and returned home, claiming that their husband had been killed at the front. The war was an extraordinary experience in other ways. It had provided an exhilarating taste of freedom after the purges of 1937 and 1938. Hopes for a complete end to the terror had arisen. Fascism was defeated. Trotsky was dead. Agreements were being made with the Western powers. There seemed no reason for the NKVD to be paranoid anymore. But back in the Soviet Union, people had already started to 421 the fall of Berlin. 1945 realized from the sudden arrest of friends that the informer was at work again, with NKVD squads on their early morning calls. Their nearness of death at the front had done much to remove the Stalinist conditioning of fear. Officers and soldiers had become quite outspoken, especially about their aspirations for the future. Those from rural areas wanted to do away with the collective farms. Officers had been given primacy over the political officers in the autumn of 1942, believed that it was now time for the Soviet bureaucratic elite, the nomenclatura, to face similar reform. In the most cynical fashion, Stalin had encouraged rumors of the sort during the war, hunting at greater freedom while all the time intending to crush it the moment the fighting was over with the approach of victory. Red Army officers had indeed started to become overconfident in the eyes of Smersh and the NKVD, and political officers had now forgotten the insults of Red Army counterparts when they had been downgraded at the time of the Battle of Stalingrad. They were also extremely concerned again by soldiers' letters comparing conditions in Germany with those at home. Abukamov's Smersh was afraid of a new Decemberist mood amongst officers. The Soviet authorities were actually aware that the soldiers of the Russian army, which had invaded France in 1814, compared life there with their miserable existence at home. At that time, one report explained the influence of French life was a progressive one because it gave Russian people the opportunity to see the cultural backwardness of Russia, Tsar suppression, and so forth. From the Decembrists who attempted the liberal coup d'etat in 1825 drew their conclusions on the need to fight Tsarist autocracy. Nowadays, it was a very interesting thing. Perhaps some landowner's estate is richer than some collective farm. From this, a man who was politically backwards drew a conclusion in favor of a feudal economy against the socialist variety. This kind of influence is regressive. This is why a merciless fight is necessary against these attitudes. Political departments were also horrified by the anti-Soviet comments of soldiers, complaining that their families were treated badly at home. "We don't believe that life is getting better in the rear," one soldier is reported to have said. "I've seen it with my own eyes." They were also aware of how badly they had been treated themselves at the front. The men in the White Horse units in the Red Army came close to mutiny just before the end of the war, when the instructions specified that the bodies of dead soldiers were to be stripped even of their undergarments. Only officers could be buried fully clothed. There were also apparently an increasing number of cases of unpopular officers being shot in the back by their own men. Smersh arrests for systematic anti-Soviet talk and terrorist intentions increased dramatically during the last months of the war, and just after the surrender, even the chief of staff of an NKVD rifle battalion was arrested for having systematically carried out counter-revolutionary propaganda amongst the troops. He has slandered leaders of the party and the Soviet government.